Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with veteran jazz saxophonist Jerry Vivino. His latest 2018 CD, Coast to Coast with Bucky Pizzarelli and Others, is a wonderful album. He was born in Paterson, New Jersey, where music and art was an everyday thing in the Vivino household during his childhood. By the age of 16, he started playing saxophone. His life picked up steam. Jerry toured with Frankie Valli in the Four Seasons from 1978 to 79. And all roads led to 1993 when his friend and Bruce Springsteen drummer Max Weinberg asked him if he would like to be a part of a band that he put together to audition for a late-night talk show known as Late Night with Conan O'Brien. That led to 25 years of full action. And now the Basic Cable Band is no longer in the Conan world, so he is moving on into new ventures. We spoke to him about this, that, and so much of the other. So please get to know Jerry and dig this interview, my friends.
Jerry, thank you for taking a minute for Neon Jazz, man. It's an honor.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, man, my pleasure. So before we get into your life and music, which has been a very interesting ride, I want to talk about your latest album, Coast to Coast. It's a great album. It's stuck on my phone. I can't stop listening to it. Talk to me about the construction of this album.
It was actually a work in progress over time. The legendary guitarist Bucky Pizzarelli, who grew up with my father as kids, basically had a health issue. And the word got out that Bucky was not doing well. He was in the hospital. He had a mild stroke, I would say, but when you're 90 years old or 91 years old, you know, the word mild, I think, becomes critical. You know, I had been friends with Bucky and the family, John and Martin, as growing up as a kid through my pop. My dad would take me to concerts in Paterson, New Jersey, you know, local band shell concerts, and I was 8, 9, 10 years old, and my dad would just talk about, you got to hear this friend of mine, guitarist. We grew up as kids. All he did was practice. So Bucky was basically at my father's preaching about him from when I was small, and when I took up the clarinet at 10 years old, he would parallel my practice schedule to what Bucky would do at 10 years old. Dad would say, hey, did you practice today? And I'd say, yeah. And he'd say, how much did you practice? And I'd say a half an hour. And he said, well, Bucky would practice an hour. You know, it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek way that he tried to inspire me. But it got to the point where I was like, who is this guy? Why do I have to be compared to Bucky Pizzarelli? You know, I want to go outside and play with my friends. But, you know, it was all good. And basically I met Bucky, and my ears as a young kid told me, wow, this is a special musician. And as the years went on, I grew as a musician, studying and practicing, and I eventually started doing a few gigs in my 20s with Bucky and with people. You know, I'm 30 years his junior. So when I was in my 20s, he was in his 50s. And basically, I started actually doing little gigs, nothing on the high end, like fashion shows and pit gigs. But it was a situation for me that I thought, wow, this is great. And I'm playing with someone that I heard about my whole life, and I know who he is. And maybe I'm going to arrive as a musician. So anyway, to get off that, you know, I went my own way, and when Bucky got ill, I happened to call the Pizzarelli house, and they said they would keep me posted. Martin, the bassist from the Pizzarelli family, I had him on the phone about a year after Bucky was out of the hospital and doing well, and I happened to call him for a gig, and I just said, hey, how's your pop doing? And he goes, Jerry's right here, and he wants to talk to you. So basically what that conversation became was, hey, Bucky, how are you? How you feeling? I hear you're playing again. And he quickly just said, well, when are we going to play again? And I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, no, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd love to record a few tracks with you. My dad had passed away about 4 years prior to this conversation. And I said I think my dad would be shining down on me and you and would make him proud. And he goes, you tell me when and where and we'll do it. So, I got on with Martin and I said, your dad wants to record a few tracks with me. Let's set it up. And he goes, Jerry, let's set it up. So basically I just thought I would do a few tracks with Bucky and keep it in my personal archives. And I asked Bucky what he wanted to play, and he selected, which are on this Coast to Coast record, he selected Body and Soul and Honeysuckle Rose. And I said, that's great, that's 2 cover tunes. I have an original that I never named that I really thought would be suited well for you to play on with me. And he said, okay, bring it along. So, we did that track as well, and that's an original track that I titled Paterson, which is Paterson, New Jersey, where my dad and Bucky grew up. And the Pizzarelli family and the Vivinos actually grew up about 2 blocks from each other when my pop was a kid. We're talking 1930s, When I finished those tracks, this, at the time, 91-year-old legendary guitarist, I listened back and I was just like blown away by his musicianship and what he brought to the table, and what came out of those sessions was catalytic to me saying, I think I need to do more recording. Not necessarily with Bucky. As I listened to those tracks, the rough tracks on my flight back, I recorded those in New Jersey, where Bucky picked a studio in New Jersey close to his home. And I recorded those tracks and listened back on the plane, and I said, wow, why don't I do some tracks in L.A.? So basically, that whole conversation with Bucky, it just grew into this record, and I did half of it in L.A. and half of it in New York, New Jersey, East Coast, West Coast, Coast to Coast. So there you go.
Right on. So, speaking about your childhood, it almost seemed like you were destined for music. You grew up in a very artistically driven house, listening to a lot of jazz when you were growing up. Was it kind of destined that you were going to become a musician?
My father was a very good trumpet player, not just a good trumpet player. He was drafted into the Army during World War II, the end of World War II. He basically was in an Army band. He was in an Army, he was the guy who got up and played taps and revelry and, basically did his 6 weeks training and then basically was swinging with the Cats in the Army band. It kept him here. Believe it or not, he was stationed in Washington, D.C. in the Army band. So, I hate to say it, but he was bulletproof, so to speak. All hands on deck, if we invaded Japan, but we didn't. So when he came out of the Army at 20 years old, he was discharged. He said to his father, hey, Pop, I want to pursue music. Is that okay? His father had a construction business, and they came over from Italy. My father was born in Calabria, Italy, and as a small child, came over with his family, and his father started a construction company and lived the American dream. And they told my dad, he and his older brother, like hell you're going to be a musician. You're going to swing a hammer. We need you here. And, back in that day, he could have run away and eloped with his trumpet, so to speak. But, thank God he didn't, because if he did that, I don't think I'd be talking to you right now. The route you take is basically the journey you take creates the life you live. And I believe that. And, here we are talking. My dad would never have met my mom. But he put the trumpet down in a sad way because he thought, I'm not going to play part-time. I want to play. But he played in my house my whole life. I met musicians as I grew. From age 18, 19, 20, I was doing club dates with people that knew my dad. And they said, gee, we try to get your old man to come out and play, but he won't. And I said, well, he plays at home all the time. He put on Louis Armstrong records and, Pete Fountain and all kinds of New Orleans swinging jazz and Duke Ellington. And he'd be sitting on the couch playing along. And his heart was really in the music, and myself and my brothers, he gave us music lessons at 9, 10 years old, and he told us, live your dream, because he wasn't, I can't say he wasn't allowed to live his dream. It went against, he was a good boy. He listened to his parents, so to speak, and, he had a good life, and, he was an excellent carpenter, and there you go. But he really never stopped playing. Later in life, when he retired from working his construction business with his brother and the family business, he decided at 65 years old, when he retired, he was in a good place, and he was in 5 different groups. He was in a Dixieland group, a symphonic orchestra, all with retirees, and he died happy playing music. So in a way, he found it again, and my brothers and I embraced that and would support him. And so there you go. That's the story of that era, would you say?
Right on. Yeah, totally. So the one thing about you is that you were really swayed. Obviously, you heard so many people growing up, and with your father's prowess on the instrument and what he played for you. But Stan Getz really got you going. What was it about Stan that really parted the curtains for you?
I started on the clarinet at 10 years old, and my father said to me, I said, Dad, I don't want to play the clarinet, I want to play the saxophone. And my father knew enough about being in the Army band and, from his high school days all the way through the military, he met so many musicians, and he knew how a doubler, meaning a woodwind player, the clarinet was the instrument. If you could master the clarinet, or get pretty good on it, the saxophone would be much easier to play. And he said, 5 years of clarinet, son, and if you're doing well with it, we'll talk about the saxophone when you're 15. So that happened. My teacher was named Ray Gerard. He started me on the saxophone, so I had 5 years of clarinet, and I was doing really well with the clarinet. And sure enough, because of that training, I picked up the saxophone, and bang, everything was pretty much there for me, technically, finger-wise. But I just had to get my embouchure together. So that moved along, and my father said to me, hey, you have to start listening to saxophone players, because, it'll help you, help your development. I decided, my father bought me a Boots Randolph record, and he said, these are melodies, you should learn to play them. That record had Yakety Sax on it, but it had The Shadow of Your Smile. It had Apple Blossom Cherry Pink. It had tunes that were top tunes of that time when that record was released in the 60s. And it was a hit record that came out probably in 1962, and I started the saxophone in 1968, 69 rather, in January of 69. I learned those melodies, and then I started putting jazz radio on, and I listened to John Coltrane. And I was blown away, of course, and I bought a few John Coltrane records. And I told my sax teacher, Ray Gerard, I can't believe this musician, John Coltrane, I'm listening to Giant Steps. And he just said to me, he goes, listen, Jerry, keep these records, listen to these records. And I said, I can't play along with them. I said, I can't even come close. And it was very frustrating to me, inspiring and frustrating. He said, I think you should start listening to this guy. And I said, who? And he introduced me to Stan Getz. He said, listen to Girl from Ipanema, listen to Desafinato. He goes, this is a master saxophonist, but you can play these melodies. And it developed my ears, and I loved his sound. And that's really how I was introduced to Stan Getz, through a teacher of mine, private instructor named Ray Gerard. So I think that's enough about that. Let's move on. I respect so many great saxophonists, but Stan was very influential to me. So was Charlie Parker, too, Kansas City guy.
Yeah, totally, yeah. Yeah, Charlie was the guy, yeah. So the thing about you is that, when you decided to go to the Manhattan School and you started going, it's just been a constant whirlwind with you. And in the early goes, in 78, 79, you were with Frankie Valli in the Four Seasons. That had to be a huge learning experience early on in life.
That was my first, basically 23 23 years old, when I jumped on that band. That band, those musicians, it was a connection. It wasn't about me actually getting the gig because there was an audition posted, although I did have to audition, and I can get into that later. I was in a big band called the Johnny Bello Joey Cass Big Band from when I was 19 years old, and it performed in Garfield, New Jersey at a lounge called the Down Under Lounge every Monday night. And John Bello, the late great John Bello, a trumpet player he was with Maynard, he was Judy Garland, Streisand, he played with everyone. He basically got through. This teacher of mine, Ray Gerard, was called for that band. And it paid $15, $20 by the time you were done. And Ray couldn't do the gig. He was busy with other things. And he said, "Hey, I have a student. Check this kid out." So Johnny called me, Johnny Bello, and he said, "Hey, your teacher says you can play, and why don't you come in and do a rehearsal?" And from there, he basically said, "Yeah." And they put me on the fourth tenor chair, which is the second tenor part of the band. So he basically introduced me to so many different players, and Frankie Valli's contractor came into a concert one night. His name was Duke Natoli, who was the baritone player, and he went on the road with Frankie. And he pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, how old are you?" And I said, this was a few years after I joined Johnny's band. He said, "I'm 22. And he said to me, would you like to go on the road?" So we talked. And I said, "Yeah." And Frankie said that the alto tenor chair, that was the chair I would play, he said, "Whoever it is has to learn the solo to Swearing to God." Basically, I learned the solo. I said, "Who's playing this solo?" It was a fellow named George Young, who's still alive and was a great, he's 82 years old, and he's my good friend to this day. I learned the solo, and that was my audition. He wanted that solo note for note to be played when Frankie performed Swearing to God. I got the gig, and I went on the road, spent a year and a half to 2 years, and I met the great keyboard player Mitch Foreman at the time, was living in New York also. Mitch is on Coast to Coast on One Cut, and I play with him out here in California. Lee Shapiro was the musical director. Lee and I go back to the 6th grade together. He had a bunch of young guys in the band. He wanted to young it up, so to speak, and it gave us a break and an opportunity to expand our musical life, so to speak. So that's how that happened.
Max Weinberg, you run into him, and the story of how you chose between going with the Conan band, going with Max, and Steely Dan. Life is full of decisions, split decisions that can affect the rest of your life. It sounds like that probably was one of the best musical decisions you've made in your life.
I really think so, yeah. I would say so, 25 years later. Max Weinberg, when Bruce decided to make a change with the E Street Band and do his solo stint, Max reached out to his good friend Joe D'Elia, and Max started a music label called Music Makers with Jeff Nissom, I think it was. I can't recall, that may be the wrong name. But anyway, Max partnered up with a colleague of his and decided to be the executive producer of Music Masters. And basically they were taking artists like Stanley Turrentine, for instance, and Joe D'Elia would produce these records, and they were releasing them. CDs were kind of still a hot item, and there were record stores, and I think there were still a few Sam Goody's out on the East Coast, and Tower Records was all over the place. So that company started doing well, and then Joe, who was a producer, music for public radio stations and PBS specials and HBO specials, he actually hired me and Mark Pender quite a lot to do a lot of his sessions. Mark and I knew each other a couple of years prior to that. we were on the road together doing lots of different things from Southside Johnny to Springsteen to, we worked with Lucy Arnaz, believe it or not, together, and that's where I met La Bamba and Mark. And we were in the studio together. So Joe had a coalition of musicians, and he said to Max, "Why don't you do a record? It'll be Killer Joe D'Elia with Max Weinberg." Well, Max actually said to Joe, "Why don't we do a record with you?" And Joe, so they marketed it with Max's name on it, but Joe was a piano player, a honky-tonk type, New Orleans type piano player. So that band was basically put together with Max playing drums, and we did a fair amount of gigs, and that's how I really met Max Weinberg. So when the Conan situation came about, Max basically handpicked my brother Jimmy. We were all involved with Killer Joe D'Elia's band. He handpicked everyone in the band, and he knew La Bamba through Bruce. So he put the band together, and basically we did an audition, and no one ever thought anything would come of it, but it did. And I was looking at an itinerary it wasn't Steely Dan, it was Donald Fagen. He had broken away from Walter Becker. And my brother and I were both on that Fagen mini tour. And my brother and I spoke, and we just said, what do we do here? Do we roll the dice? Do we do 5 weeks with Steely Dan, and then we don't know what's going to come of that? Which was a great decision because, Fagen actually, it was a great decision because here we are talking about Conan, and one door closed, we closed it, and another one opened. So, yeah, I think it was luck, too, because we were really on the fence. But we figured this TV opportunity comes along once in a lifetime. It's that. Let's take the shot. So that's how it happened.
So we're looking at 25 years later. You've had a magnanimous run with Conan, and you're looking at another door opening up in your life. We're talking about this album, but you're also looking into the future. What's on the horizon? What do you want to see happen?
Well, now that the TV gig's over, I want to play jazz and blues gigs till I run out of money. No, I'm kidding. The goose that laid the golden egg for me is that being a full-time musician and being vested in, prior to the television show, I was 38 years old when I got the call for Conan. So do the math, 25 years later. It's really a little over 25 because, believe it or not, I can't believe this. On January 8th, I'm going to be 65 years old. So all of this, my history, even prior to Conan, I started with Frankie in my early 20s. I've been contributing to recording and Broadway work and show work and, major tours that contribute into a pension plan. And if any young musicians are listening to this, please take note. It's extremely important to try and get yourself vested because, the life of a musician can be hundreds and hundreds of cash gigs and, basically recording sessions that are paper dates, But if you can get into a situation where there's contributions made on your behalf for health and pension, you could be looking at something that will help you out later in life. So I'm vested, and at 65, which is coming up, you're forced to take your pension and you can continue working. So that's looming for me, and what it does is it gives me an opportunity to pick and choose the gigs I might want to do or might not want to do. I love playing, and I'm not saying you won't see me in a blues bar or a jazz club where the money isn't the issue, it's about the music. But this really gives me an opportunity to really just say, hey, I want the music to make me happy now, and I just want to play music that it's not about the money, It should never be about the money, but it is, because this is what we do. And you need to pay bills, and you need to take care of yourself and your family. So there you go. The great Ernie Watts. Ernie Watts played on The Tonight Show, Sonny Chris Chrisley, guys like that are on so many records. I ran into Ernie, who's been retired for quite a few times, and he knew I was doing Conan. This was when I came out here 10 years ago. He lives in L.A. And he was the one who said to me, Jerry, it's great that you've been doing it. He goes, because time flies. And I'm in a situation where I can just do this, meaning he was on a jazz gig. And, embrace that pension and what you've worked hard for, because it will come back at you, and let your creative juices flow and just do your thing. So I'm really looking forward to that. I have gigs lined up with Bernie Dressel's big band. I'm going back east this weekend. I work with the Fab Four, which is Will Lee's group. And I have my own jazz quartet, as you know, from coast to coast, quartet/quintet, that I'm lining up gigs and looking for an agent that I would feel comfortable to possibly start booking me. If anyone's listening, I have no representation. I'm ready to talk. So there you go. I hope I've explained it haven't over-elaborated, but that's where I'm at.
No, that's cool. That's totally cool. And the one thing about you and who you are is that you've obviously been in front of a camera for 25 years. You've done a lot of commercial jingles. You've really been in front of people, and your work has been prolific up to this point. So my question is this. Let's get to the essence of who you are. Everyone has a version of you. Your family, your friends, your work colleagues, those that have seen you, but you know who you are. So tell me, who do you think you are?
I'm just a person who loves people, and my true passion was I wanted to play second base for the New York Yankees. So when I knew that wasn't going to happen, I got even more serious with my music. I think I'm just a guy who loves music, loves my family, loves baseball, living life. I love food. I eat a little too much. I got to watch that. I think I'm a guy that just will continue to strive to get things right. Not just with music, but with life in general, with people, decisions. Everybody has pluses and negatives, and we try to, there's evil and there's good, and you try to be good. And, you have to handle situations. As I get older, I'm a little more patient with my decisions, with the route I might take. And I'm just trying to live the rest of my life in a good, clean way, and be kind to others and listen, and continue playing until my teeth fall out.
Yeah. Amen, man. Yeah.
That's an excellent question. Who I am. In the end, it's when you know that you did your best. I think that's all you can ask for. Whatever you're doing, if you try your hardest and do your best, I think you'll be fine.
Without a doubt. That's the most instant karma you can probably walk into, realistically.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Jerry, thank you for opening up about your music. Thank you for the music. And I know I mentioned it before, but I was a huge steward of watching you guys on Conan, and I was always blown away by the amount of musical talent that was on there. And it was very evident from not only you guys in the band, but from Conan and those that ran the show, that music was a huge priority for them. And I appreciated that, not only from an entertainment standpoint. I think Conan's the funniest guy in late night. He will always be one of the funniest guys that's ever been on late night, hands down. But I think the music that was brought to the world consistently was high class all the time.
I can't disagree with you. Conan, I can honestly say that, he's a celebrity, but he's my friend. He's everyone's friend, not just the band. He knows everyone's name on the show. It could be the person who sweeps the floors. He has that ability to connect with everyone on his staff. I saw that from the get-go with him. I admire that, and I learned from that you can be on top of the world, but he made a decision based on letting the band go, which was the most difficult decision of his career. I honestly believe that, because he connected with us. And to give you an example of how he cared so much about his staff, I'll give you the story about myself. It opened my eyes. I said, wow, he really cares about us, you know. Early on, about 2.5 years into the show, you know, I needed to sub out for about 4 or 5 shows. And I went to the executive producer and said, you know, there's something I really want to do. If it's okay, I could get a sub. I ran it by Max. He said, I need to speak to you guys about it. It's okay with Max. I wanted to go out for 4 days to Chicago to do these gigs with Keely Smith, the late great Keely Smith, Louis Prima's ex-wife performer. I loved her music and Louis' music, and you know, I had been doing gigs on the weekends and at night with her for 7 years. And she said, Jerry, I really need you. If you can do this, it'd be great. And I said, let me check with the show because I'd like to do it. So I did it. And when I came back, Conan called me into his office after a show and he said, hey, I noticed you were gone. Is everything okay? And I said, yes, it is. And I appreciate the show letting me go. He goes, well, you went out with Keely Smith. That's great. How was it? And he wanted to know every detail. And he said, Jerry, I'm only asking because I'm really hopeful that you're happy here. Is it that you wanted to? And I said, Conan, please. He goes, no, I really want to make sure that you wouldn't be leaving for 4 days because you're tired of this. And it was so heartfelt. And I realized, he said, I would never stop anyone from doing something they want to do. But if it's for reasons beyond that, I'd like to know, because I don't want to. And if you get the gist of what I'm saying, yeah, I shared that with the guys, and we had a few other situations where Mark and Richie went out with Bruce, and I did too. We did the Super Bowl, and you know, it wasn't constant, but they didn't want to see us subbing out. Conan liked to see this. It was a family that he created. He created a real family situation on the show. And he wished everyone the best, anyone who may have left for other reasons. He always wished everyone the best. But he had concern. And I learned from that as well. Like, wow, he really cares about what everyone's doing and he's involved.
I could see that. Just as someone that was a viewer, there was enough segments when things were real heavy that would happen and the way he would react to it. I got that sentiment. And I even got that with segments that he did. And I knew just overall with just the way he treated you guys, I could see it, you know, and it was evident. And that's the thing that I think that's always been endearing and enduring about him, is that he is unbelievably funny, but beneath all of the humor, I can see a human being. And that is reassuring. And I think the one thing that I realized, I was heartbroken when he didn't get a Tonight Show gig, but I knew he did it because of his integrity. And I knew that he could have taken the bullet for himself and done it for himself. But I think what I saw that resonated out of that decision was that he did it for you guys and for the staff. And I remember when he went to TBS making it very clear that he loved you guys. And it was very evident. And it was an altruistic decision from what I could see, instead of it being from what a lot of people did, from what his predecessor did, which was about them, about the people serving themselves. And he wasn't that kind of cat, and I don't see him being that kind of cat. So that's always reassuring when people you admire are real and good and have integrity. It just makes life better.
You know, the Tonight Show, we all know the story. I don't need to revamp it, but you know, they wanted to, why don't we put you on at midnight? We'll have Jay do half an hour and then you'll come on at midnight. I guess midnight to 1 or midnight to 12:30, but you know, they thought the Tonight Show, Conan, I believe, this is my own theory here, that if he had done that, I think they eventually just would have moved Jay in completely. And you know, Conan, he made it clear he had a meeting with all of us, and he said, look, I didn't sign up for a 12 o'clock Tonight Show. This is the decision I'm making. He wasn't let go. He was offered a different scenario, and I think he made the right decision, you know?
Yeah.
He totally did. I mean, we landed on our feet. He took care of so many people when he decided to leave the Tonight Show, and he had the meeting saying, look, I'm going to be back, and you all can go out and find other gigs, but I want to hire each and every one of you for my new show when I land somewhere. And you know what? He did just that.
Yeah.
And he took the band on a tour And what a great time we had. You know, that probably was the best tour I mean, look, I was out on the road with so many people, and I gotta say, that one I didn't want to end, although I knew it would end because it was catalytic to him connecting with TBS. And there were a lot of offers from other stations, and he partnered up with TBS, and I think he made a great decision. You know, television has changed. Network's not what it used to be. You know, cable isn't even what it used to be now. You know, there's people are watching when they want on the internet in the palm of their hand on their iPad or their iPhone or smartphone. You can get right to it, you know, and just say, oh, well, I missed Conan last night. Let me go to the Team Coco site and watch that show.
Yeah.
You know, in January, they're putting up every single show on the Conan website, from the very first show that we did on The Tonight Show all the way through our last show here.
Wow.
They're archiving every single show. So, hey, you know, just this is the landscape that we're dealing with. And, you know, there are reasons that there's always been change in entertainment. And the entertainment business, when TV was evolved, people who were radio entertainers were like, that's going to kill radio. But it didn't kill radio. Radio's still there.
Yeah.
You know, there's different formats of it, you know.
Yeah.
I scratch my head and say, gee, why am I even putting out CDs anymore? There's no more record stores. You know, it's CD Baby and Amazon and everyone's streaming and, you know, only people who want to hold something in their hand will go out and get vinyl or a CD now. You know, automobiles are being made without CD players. But I'm realizing that, okay, this changes, this is what's happening, and you either go with it or you just say, that's it, I'm done. And I don't want to be done, so I have to get with the program and learn about what the young people are basically into now. And in the end, it'll be good. You know, it has to be, because music's not going to go away. Movies and TV are not going to go away. It's just how we're going to be watching them or listening that's changing.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, hey, man, thank you again for taking your time out today. I really appreciate it. Good luck with the next venture in your life. And hopefully at some point, man, you can jam with Loveman here in KC, and I'll catch you live.
Yeah. Yeah, he wants to do that with me, and we're going to do it because he wants to take me to Getz. Is it really that good?
Oh, man, get out of town. You've got to have it.
I've had it with Mark. He orders it up sometimes, you know, and there's a couple others out in Kansas City, but it's the best barbecue I've ever had, you know, as far as barbecue goes. I love it. But and it's a great city, and it's a great music town, and there's the Negro League Hall of Fame. I'm a baseball freak, so I'd like to see that. And the Jazz Museum is right next to it, isn't it?
Yep, it's right there, one shot.
Yeah, so I think it would be a lot for me to really enjoy. I've been to Kansas City in and out on the road at times. That's about it. I appreciate you reaching out to me and having me as part of your program.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Los Angeles, New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the globe, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Jerry for his music, his class, and his time. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.